Good day, everyone. I'm Jacqueline Olarte, and our group will report the Chapter 3 for the operational audit, which is the risk assessment. So, the theory of constraints adopts the common idiom which says that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. This means that the organization, programs, processes, and even the departments are vulnerable because the weakest element can always damage, break, or at the very least, adversely affect the outcome. So, even if the chain is strong, its weakest link is it's just a small one. That is why it needs to be as strong as it is. So there are many types of risk ranging from operational, strategic, compliance, reporting, and IT related. So their consequences may vary and are influenced by the types of vulnerabilities involved and the degree to which these consequences can be anticipated to deter or prevent their occurrence. And this means that the management must be aware, engaged, and knowledgeable to learn from the history and understand the present and to prepare for the future. So going back, we will define the risk assessment as the process of identifying, measuring, and analyzing risk relevant to a program or a process. So this assessment, it is systematic, it iterative, and subject to both quantitative and qualitative inputs and factors. Furthermore, it is also dependent on the time frame of the review. So in risk assessment, first is the identification of risk. We have to identify it first. So this takes the form of a list of risk. So sometimes the internal auditors fail to identify relevant risks due to their lack of in-depth knowledge about the process being audited. Well, this is understandable to a certain extent because they are external reviewers. Another reason for auditors' limited identification of risk is the bias that some may have as a result of the common training many have in accounting. Well, if the auditor has been educated in accountancy, he or she had experience in accounting and has focused primarily on accounting and compliance audit. So, to avoid these issues, it is very useful to include in the risk identification exercise people with an extensive knowledge of the program. So, it needs to have people who review it who have a broad knowledge on that certain process or in that certain program to be analyzed. And another way to identify relevant risk is to use a prepared list. Well, there are multiple templates and lists available, which are often organized by industry. Some of them are the COSO, the ISO, the Information Technology Infrastructure Library or ITEL, the CIVINET, and others. They have prepared lists that can help to identify some of the key risks that should be included in the assessment. And when using them, the auditors should always consider the peculiarities of their organizations and make sure that the list is adapted accordingly. So when we say peculiarities, it means there's some it a different in that organization or somewhat not familiar. They should pay attention to that. So the following are some common risks that operational auditors should consider during the risk assessment. While not all risks are applicable to every organization, it's because differences in industry for their business activities, their geographical location, and the size of their organization makes a difference. That is why not all risks are applicable to one organization. So here are some operational risk types. So first is capacity. It has the description to the inability to produce many units required or the inability to order goods and services past the promised date or producing too many defective parts. Another type is the strategic. It means that failing to maintain beneficial relationship with the customers or lack of funding to finance the business expansion, and also the lack of strategy to or knowledge drained due to the employee turnover or they lack strategy in terms of changing in terms of knowing the customer preferences. Another type is the compliance. Example of this is failure to meet external requirements, the standard operating procedure requirements, or the combined requirements. So, as the word say compliance, it is more on requirements that has been failed to do. Next would be the natural environment. So, from the word natural environment, mostly it talks about the floods, earthquakes, the hurricanes, the damages that it has been done. Also, the inability to secure needed resources or the business interruption caused by the disease or the virus, and the changes in legislation or regulation due to government changes, or the social unrest that is the energy supply disruption. Next would be the political, where there would be changes in legislation or regulation due to government changes, and there may be a social unrest that is triggered by the government changes. So next would be the internal constraints. So it is imperative for the internal auditors to remember that there are internal and external constraints in organization. When we say internal, it is within the organization, and when we say external, it is outside the scope of the organization. So internal constraints typically include equipment, so the type of equipment available and the ways they are used limit the ability of the process to produce more high quality goods or deliver services. So equipment, so they need to know the capacity or the ability of the equipment of how many it can produce, or if the goods that being produced are in high quality or not. Next would be the people. So it can be unconstrained if there are lack of skilled and motivated workers, because it limits the productive capacity of any process. So the factors that could cause this constraint are the attitude and the other mental models of the workers. Next would be the policies. So there are written and unwritten policies which can prevent the process from producing more of a higher quality goods and services. That is why it is very important for the management or the organization to make their policies more clear to their employees or workers in order to avoid these kinds of constraints. In addition, when evaluating internal dynamics and risk, internal auditors should be concerned about first, the slowest operation in a process. Second, the synchronization of activities within or between the processes. And third, the robbing of materials and other resources within or between the processes or units. So a large number of operational issues are materialized due to one or several of these dynamics. That is why it is important that these three should be paid attention. Then the next in the risk assessment will be the measurement of the risk, but it will be discussed on my co-group mates. So that would be all for my report, and thank you for listening. That would be all.